I thought being sold for $3 million was the end of my life. But I was wrong. It was just the beginning of a nightmare I didn't want to wake up from. My father thought he was paying off a debt, but Ciro Valentino didn't want the cash.
He wanted me.
As I stood there in that black wedding dress, I realized the silencer hadn't come to collect a payment. He had come to claim a prize. This is the story of how I became the property of the Mafia's deadliest man, and why I eventually chose to stay. Welcome to the Diary of Hearts, where Mafia romance gets dangerously addictive. If you're new, hit subscribe. 3 new stories every week, and once you start, you can't stop. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The rain was not a blessing. It felt like a shroud draped over the city of Chicago. I stood in the back of the cold, stone chapel, watching my father's hands tremble as he adjusted his tie. He wasn't crying for me. He wasn't mourning the loss of his only daughter. He was crying for himself. The man who had gambled my soul away to the devil just to save his own skin from a gambling debt he could never repay. I could hear the rain drumming against the stained glass windows. It sounded like 1,000 skeletal fingers tapping, waiting for me to stumble. The air in the church was thick with the scent of old incense and melting beeswax. It felt more like a tomb than a place of worship. My wedding dress was heavy, a weight of silk and lace that felt like cold chains wrapped around my ribs. It wasn't white. White was for the innocent. White was for women who had a choice. Ciro had requested it be the color of midnight. A black bride for a black-hearted man. I looked at my reflection in a darkened prayer room window. I looked like a ghost haunting my own life. My father leaned in close. His breath smelled of stale whiskey and the sharp, metallic scent of fear. Smile, Aria. For God's sake, look happy. If you look like a victim, he will take it as an insult to his ego. Do you want us all dead before the night is over? I didn't answer him. I couldn't find the words. My throat was tight, blocked by a mountain of resentment that had been building since the moment he told me my fate. I looked down at my hands. The roses I held were dark red, so dark they were almost the color of dried blood. I wondered if the thorns were still on them. I almost hoped they were. I wanted to feel a sharp pain, something to ground me, something other than this cold, empty numbness that was freezing my blood. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the church groaned open on their iron hinges. The wind swept in from the street, cold and sharp. It blew out half the candles along the aisle, plunging the room into flickering shadows. He was there, Ciro Valentino, the man the papers called the silencer because he never left witnesses to speak his name. He didn't walk like a groom coming to meet his love. He moved with purpose, every step on the marble floor sounding like a drumbeat, a death march for the girl I used to be. He was tall, towering over the men who followed him. His shoulders were broad enough to carry the weight of the entire city's sins. His suit was black, sharp and expensive, tailored to hide the weapons I knew he carried. And his eyes. Those eyes were the color of a winter's sea just before a storm hits. Cold, deep, lethal. He didn't wait at the altar for me to walk to him. He didn't follow the rules of the church. He walked straight down the aisle to where I stood. He ignored my father as if he were a piece of trash discarded on the sidewalk. Ciro stopped just inches away from me. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, clashing with the chill of the rain on his coat. I could smell him. Oak moss.
Rain.
And something metallic, like a gun that had just been cleaned and oiled. He reached out a hand. His gloved fingers touched my chin, gently but firmly forcing me to look up. You are shaking, Piccola. His voice was a low growl, a sound that made my skin prickle with a strange electricity. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I tried to pull away, but his grip held me steady. Do not look at the floor. Look at me. From this moment on, I am the only thing in this world that you need to see. The ceremony was a blur of Latin words I couldn't understand and promises I didn't want to make. I didn't feel like a wife. I felt like a signature on a contract, like something traded between 2 men in a dark room. I watched his hand as he signed the registry. His signature was bold, sharp, dangerous. When the priest finished, the air felt sucked out of the room. Ciro didn't kiss me. He simply leaned down to my ear, his lips brushing against my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. Let's go. Your prison is waiting. We sat in the back of a black SUV as it sped through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago. The glass was tinted so dark that the world outside looked like a gray dream. I watched the city, lights move across his face. He was beautiful in a way that was terrifying, like a statue carved from obsidian. His jaw was like granite. His lips were a thin, hard line. I couldn't take the silence anymore. It was eating me alive, filling my head with horrific thoughts. How much did he owe you? I asked. My voice sounded small, like a child lost in the woods. Ciro didn't turn his head to look at me. He stared at the back of the driver's seat. Your father is a small man with a big appetite for things he cannot afford. He owed me $3 million in cash. But in my world, Aria, money is just paper. He owed me a debt of honor. He failed to deliver on a promise. He finally turned his gaze toward me. It felt like being caught in the crosshairs of a rifle. But I didn't take you to get the money back. Money is easy to find. I can make $3 million in an hour. A woman with your fire, that is a rare find. I don't have a fire anymore, I whispered, looking at my lap. You bought the embers. There's nothing left to burn. Ciro leaned closer. The space between us vanished until I could feel his breath on my cheek. I bought your time. I bought your name. But your fire? That I have to earn. And I always get what I want. The Valentino estate was a fortress on a hill, overlooking the dark waters of the lake. High stone walls topped with wire, heavy iron gates, and men with cold eyes and automatic rifles standing guard at every corner. Inside, the house was silent. It was filled with white marble and long, stretching shadows. He led me to a massive room on the second floor. A fireplace was already burning, the orange flames licking the air. The bed was covered in black silk. This is your space, he said. My study is at the end of the hall. My bedroom is next to yours. Do not lock your door. Fear spiked in my chest like a physical blade. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Because I don't trust you, he said simply. I need to know you are safe, and I need to know you aren't planning to do something foolish. If that door is locked, I will assume you are hiding a weapon. Do you understand? I nodded slowly. Sleep, Aria. Tomorrow your new life begins. The next morning, I woke up to a room filled with shopping bags. Expensive brands. Names I had only seen in magazines while sitting in doctors' waiting rooms. The silk, cashmere, leather. I walked out into the hall and found Ciro at the dining table. He was reading a leather-bound file, a cup of steaming black coffee in his hand. He looked up as I entered, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. The clothes you brought from your father's house were rags, he said. I had them burned. Wear the blue silk dress tonight. We are having dinner at 8. Is that an order? I asked, trying to find a spark of my old defiance. In this house, everything I say is an order. Get used to the sound of my voice, Aria. It's the last one you'll be hearing for a long time. That dinner was the longest hour of my life. The table was 20 feet long, made of dark, polished mahogany. We sat at opposite ends, like two generals at a peace treaty that neither wanted. The only sound was the clinking of silver against china and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. I watched him move. He was graceful, even when he was just cutting a piece of steak. He looked at me, his eyes tracking the way I moved my wine glass. You aren't eating, he said. I'm not hungry for food provided by a man who bought me like a horse at an auction. Ciro set his fork down with a slow, deliberate click. The sound echoed in the quiet room. You think I am a monster, Aria. And you are right. I have done things that would keep you awake for a lifetime. But I am a monster who keeps his word. Your father is currently sitting in a safe house with a suitcase full of enough cash to start over. He is safe because you are sitting in that chair. Remember that every time you think about playing the martyr. I looked at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. Why do you want me here? You don't touch me. You barely talk to me.
You just watch me.
Like, I'm a bird in a cage. Because watching you is the only thing that reminds me I'm still a man and not just a machine, he said.
His voice was lower now.
Rougher, like sandpaper on velvet. He stood up and walked the length of the table with a slow, deliberate stride. He stopped behind my chair. He didn't touch me, but I could feel his presence like a physical weight on my shoulders. Go to bed, Aria. The shadows in this house are getting long, and you aren't ready to see what's in them yet. The days turned into a week. I began to learn the rhythm of the house. I learned that Ciro never slept more than 4 hours. I learned that he liked the smell of old books and expensive scotch. I learned that he had a collection of scars on his back, jagged lines that told a story of a violent past. I began to realize that he wasn't just a killer. He was a man carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders. A man who was just as trapped by his name as I was by mine. One night, I heard shouting from the office downstairs. It was late, past midnight. I crept down the stairs, my bare feet silent on the cold marble. I pressed my ear to the heavy oak door. The Russians are moving on the docks, Ciro, a man said. I recognized the voice. It was Marco, his right-hand man. They think you've gone soft because of the wedding. They think the girl is a weakness they can exploit. I heard the sound of a heavy fist hitting wood. The girl is not a weakness, Ciro growled, his voice vibrating through the door. She is a Valentino now. And if they even breathe the air near this house without my permission, I will burn their entire organization to the ground. Double the guards. If a single bird flies over this estate, I want it shot down. Am I clear? I turned to run back to my room, but the door swung open before I could move. Ciro stood there. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his tie gone. He looked exhausted, and he looked dangerous. He grabbed my arm and pulled me into the office, closing the door behind us with a heavy thud. I told you once. Curiosity is a death sentence in this house, he hissed, pinning me against the door. I heard my name, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Am I a weakness, Ciro? Is that what the world thinks of me? He stepped forward, his hands slamming onto the wood on either side of my head. You are a distraction, he said. His breath was hot against my face, smelling of mint and whiskey. I spend all day in meetings thinking about what you are doing in that room. I spend all night wondering if you are crying into your pillow. I can't lead an empire when my mind is constantly filled with the image of you. Then let me go, I whispered, my heart racing. Never, he said. He leaned down, his nose brushing against mine. You are the only beautiful thing I have ever truly owned. I would rather die than let you go back to that world of lies. 3 nights later, the world exploded. I was jolted awake by a sound like a bomb going off. The glass in my window shattered inward. Shards of it cut my cheek and arm. I screamed, diving for the floor as bullets tore through my pillows and shattered the lamps. The door burst open with a crash. Ciro was there. He wasn't wearing a shirt. His skin was covered in sweat, and he had a submachine gun in his hands. He tackled me to the floor, throwing his heavy body over mine as another volley of gunfire hit the walls above us. Dust and plaster filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Stay down. Don't move until I tell you, he roared. The sound of him returning fire was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a man defending everything he had. He grabbed my hand, pulling me up with a strength that nearly dislocated my shoulder. We ran through the smoke-filled hallway. I saw bodies on the floor.
Men in.
Black tactical gear that didn't belong to Ciro. Everything was covered in a fine layer of blood and debris. We reached the garage through a hidden service elevator. The black SUV was idling. Marco was behind the wheel, his face a mask of grim determination. Ciro shoved me into the back seat and climbed in after me. As we roared out of the gates and into the night, I looked back. The east wing of the mansion was engulfed in orange flames. We drove for hours, heading deep into the wooded mountains away from the city. Ciro didn't speak a word. He was busy reloading magazines, his hands steady and clinical despite the carnage we had just left behind. I looked at him in the dim light of the cabin. There was a deep, jagged cut on his shoulder. Blood was soaking into his skin, dripping onto the leather seat. Without thinking, I reached out. I used the hem of my silk robe to press firmly against the wound. He flinched, turning to look at me with eyes that were wide and surprised. The silence in the car was heavy, electric with a tension that wasn't just about the attack. Why did they come? I whispered, my voice trembling. Ciro sighed, a long, ragged sound that seemed to drain the energy from his body. Because your father is a snake. He didn't just owe me money, Aria. He was playing both sides from the very beginning. He sold my private shipping routes to the Russians for a second payout. And then he sold you to me to keep me distracted and vulnerable while they made their move. He wanted us both dead, so he could disappear with everyone's money. The betrayal felt like a physical weight in my gut. My father hadn't just sold me to save his life. He had used me as a human shield, a decoy. He had sent me into a war zone and hoped I wouldn't make it out. What will you do to him?
I asked. My voice was cold now.
The girl who had walked into that church in a black dress was dead. In her place was someone who understood the price of survival. Ciro's eyes turned back to Flint. The debt must be settled. In full. Nobody betrays a Valentino and lives to tell the tale. He reached out, his hand cupping the back of my head, pulling me toward him. You are stronger than I thought you were, Aria Valentino. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was a collision of two broken souls. It tasted like copper,
Salt.
and pure survival. In that moment, I realized I didn't want to go back to my old life of being a pawn. We spent the next week in a safe house by the coast. A small, gray stone cottage hidden deep in the pine trees. It was the first time we were truly alone. No guards inside the house. No phones ringing. Just the sound of the ocean crashing against the rocks and the heat of the fireplace. Ciro spent the days watching the horizon. But at night, he was different. He told me about his childhood. About the first time he had to kill a man to protect his brother. One evening, we sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the water. Is it over? I asked. Ciro nodded slowly. The Russians have been handled. They won't be coming back. And your father. He has been dealt with. He is alive, but he is in a place where he will never see the sun or a deck of cards again. He has nothing left. No money, no name, no family. Thank you, I whispered, looking at the golden light on the water. Ciro turned to me, a strange, vulnerable look in his eyes. You thank me for destroying the man who gave you life? I looked at the waves. He didn't give me life, Ciro. He gave me a price tag and a death sentence. You're the only person who ever looked at me and saw something more than a transaction. I turned to him, placing my hand on his chest. I could feel his heart beating, strong and steady under my palm. You told me I could never lock my door. Was that because you wanted to get in? Or because you were afraid I would lock you out of the only good thing you had left? Ciro looked down at my hand. Maybe both, he admitted. He stood up and pulled me to my feet, his arms wrapping around me. The gates to the estate were never locked, Aria. I told the guards to let you walk away if you ever tried to run. I needed to know if you were staying because you were forced or because you chose to be by my side. I stared at him, my breath caught in my throat. You risked your reputation just to give me a choice. I would risk more than that for you, he said. He stepped closer, his voice a dark promise in the twilight. The silencer doesn't need a captive. He needs a queen, someone to stand beside him when the world burns. Someone like you. I looked at the man who had bought me, the man who had killed for me, the man who had given me back my soul. I didn't hesitate. I reached up and pulled his head down mine. Then I guess the debt is finally paid, I whispered. Ciro pulled me closer, his grip tightening.
No, Aria.
The debt is just the beginning. Our story starts now. And that's exactly what happened. Aria Bennett became Aria Valentino, not because she was sold, but because she chose to stay with the man who saw her worth when everyone else saw a price tag. The man who had bought her freedom with his own heart. Question: would you let yourself be sold to pay your father's debt? Or would you refuse and let your family face the consequences? Comment your answer. I read every single one. If you love this, subscribe for 3 new Mafia romance stories every week. Trust me, the next one is even darker. Share this with your romance-obsessed bestie who loves a good enemies to lovers story. Thanks for watching. Remember, sometimes you have to be bought to finally know your worth.
See you next time.